What's up guys, Tim here from Audio Tutor. Today we're talking about your snare drum recordings, and especially we're talking about how to clean things up, how to get things sonically ready for the mixing stage. So we're talking about cleaning up that sonic sound, we're talking about controlling some of those dynamics, bringing a bit more punch into your sound. So let's get going. As you can see here, we've got a snare top and a snare bottom. I'm a disclaimer here, I am not a drummer. I recorded these, but I am not a drummer, but that doesn't matter for us. We're just designing our sound, but I'm not a drummer. So we've got the snare top and the snare bottom. On the snare top, we used a Samson CO1, and that's a great budget microphone for anyone out there looking. And we had it set up so that it was facing directly down towards the rim of the top head of the snare drum, and it was around a foot above the top head there. And then on the snare bottom, we were using a Shure Unidyne 545 Mark III from the 60s. And that was around sort of the center of the bottom head, around those snares and everything. And again, that was around a foot below the top head of the snare drum. That's very important because of phase cancellation. Now, let's have a listen to what we're doing. Before we do, one little note, make sure on your snare bottom that you are inverting the phase. It's very important, otherwise you will have some cancellation issues. Your sound will get very thin and it's just annoying. So make sure you're inverting the phase there. You can use just a we've got here a gain plugin that you can just use. Sometimes you even have an invert phase on the actual channel strip here, so but just make sure you do that. Let's listen to these individually and then together. All right, and the snare bottom. Alrighty, and let's put them together. Take this level down a bit. Nice, so well recorded, things sound nice and punchy enough, and that snare bottom, actually, I kind of like the rattliness. Those snares were quite loose, so they're quite rattly, and I kind of like that, actually. So the first thing you will have noticed there is I turned down the snare bottom. So this is the first thing you've got to kind of do, is work out your initial level between your snare top and bottom mics, all right? And just a note for you guys, you don't always have to use the snare bottom. In many mixes out there, you will find that there is no snare bottom track at all in the mix. They may have had one, but they just chose to not use it because they didn't need it. So don't just use it because it's there. If you don't want that sound in your mix, don't use it. You don't have to. It's totally up to you. And basically what you've got to do is find your level. So you could have it nice and even here. You could have this sound. All right, so you can hear a lot of those snares rattling around. All right, generally though, we usually go for a lower level on the snare bottom. So let's put it at minus 12 dB. Alright, so that's a good starting point for our snare bottom. We're at minus 12 on the snare bottom and we're at 0 on the snare top. Now that level may change when you're mixing your snare in with your whole arrangement. You might need a bit more of that snare bottom to kind of bring things through. So don't worry, you can always change things later. Now let's dive into some processing here. Let's start cleaning things up. Let's look at the snare top. And the first thing you're going to want to do is take out the things you don't need sonically, those frequencies that we don't need in our recording. So let's grab an EQ. Alrighty, you can see here there's two moves here, and you can see I'm doing a roll off and I'm doing a little cut here at what looks like around 500. What are the reasons behind this? Okay, so let's take these off for now, and let's put the analyzer on, and let's have a look. If we can actually see here with an analyzer what's happening with the frequency of this recording. Okay, so what you will have maybe noticed is that there is some low information coming in around here, in this sort of area. There's some low information just kind of popping in, just saying hi, just over here, between sort of 20 and 40, 50 hertz. And more often than not, I mean, honestly, 9 times out of 10, we just don't need that low frequency information because it's a snare drum. Snare drums sit around here, around, you know, in the upper mids, and we've got the sizzle up here. We've got that crack is around 600 hertz. The low end information is more often than not needed. All right, and it's also using up space that could be used by our kick drum and by our bass and any low synths or anything like that. So we don't want to use up that space. We want to leave it clear for our other low frequency instruments. So we're going to do a roll off, and it's a gentle curve here. Don't do a curve like this, because you'll just be taking things off too dramatically. You don't need to be that dramatic, right? Drama queen. So just a gentle slope here. We're at 48 hertz, 50 hertz, whatever, and we're just rolling things off gently. So we're just getting rid of some of that really low information that's just not necessary in this track. The next move, that one that was around here at 500-ish or 485, that's to do with our room. So drums are very loud. Newsflash, you may have known that. Drums are very loud, and you'll find that drums, more than any other instrument, like to reverberate and bounce around the room more than any other instrument, and that's because they're very loud. So your sound from your drum will bounce off the back wall and the side wall and the wall in front of you and just ring and reverberate around your room. And if you haven't got a very well sonically treated room, then you will have a rather horrendous recording. This is a pretty decent recording, but we still have some nasty sounds that I found here at 485. So I'm going to boost it for you so you can hear what that sounds like. Alright, so you can hear that. It's kind of boxy and muddy and bleh. We don't want that. We don't need that in there. So we're making a cut of 3 dB, and we've got a relatively tight Q of 4, just so we're being quite precise on that frequency and taking that out there. So that's our subtractive EQ that we're doing. The next bit of EQ we want to do is we want to get some of that sizzle into our snare drum sound. We love that sizzly sound in our snare drum, so let's go and find it. And what we're going to use to do that is an emulation EQ, just because we like a bit of saturation in that top end. So I'm using here the Lifticus by IKJB. There we go. Bit of advertising for them. They don't pay me, but anyway. And I've got the analog switch on and the keep gain on. That's kind of just helping us level match and everything. And all we're doing here is we've got at 10K, we've got a shelf boost of around 3 dB. Let's have a listen to what that's doing. So it's bringing out some of that nice sizzliness that we love in a snare drum, and it's just making things a little bit lighter as well. Things are a bit more light and crispy and fluffy, and it's creating this nice sound. So now I'm going to take out both of those EQs, the subtractive EQ that we did on our stock EQ, and then this emulation EQ as well. I'm going to take them both out and put them back in so we can see the difference we're making. So things are just sounding cleaner, aren't they? We've got a bit more in the top end. We're taking out some of that annoying room sound we didn't like. We've taken out some of that really low stuff we didn't like. Things are just sounding a bit cleaner, but now we need to look at the dynamics. This is a dynamic instrument, and so of course we're going to need to have a look at a compressor. And any guesses out there as to what compressor we might be using? It's an 1176, of course it is. Alright, so what are we doing here? Let's have a look at the settings we're using here. We have, on attack and release, we have a relatively fast attack, but not too fast. You have to be very careful with the attack time on any sort of drum sound. If you just do this, if you do a 0 millisecond attack time, that's impossibly fast. What you're going to end up with is just this squash sound, because it's going to be hammering down on that transient before it's let anything through. So you're going to lose all of that snap and that nice sound to your snare drum. It's going to just crush it and squash it, and yeah, we don't want that, so don't do that. But a nice fast attack can be fine. You need to allow a little bit of time for that snap to get through before the compressor clamps down on that transient. So we've got here a 10 millisecond attack and a release time as fast as it will go, 5 milliseconds there. For ratio up here, we're doing a 4:1. So that's heavier than, I'm a 2:1 guy. I always do 2:1 on my compression, but this is 4:1. We're doing something a bit heavier here because it's a snare drum. We love a bit of compression on a snare drum, and we're looking here at around 4 to 5 dB of gain reduction. So that's kind of a maximum. So everyone out there says 3 to 4 dB of gain reduction as an average. Another way to look at it is a maximum of 4 to 5. So let's listen to what this compressor is doing to our sound. So you see what it's doing there? It's kind of bringing more of that punchiness into our sound. Isn't it just things are sounding just a tiny bit more aggressive? And it's funny how compressors work in that way, that you're turning down a signal, but because you're turning up because you're using that makeup gain to turn up the rest of the signal, it gives us this sort of it tricks our ears into thinking that the original sound source is a lot more aggressive. There's that bit more attack and a bit more punch in the sound. So it's funny how compressors work in that weird way, but we are adding some nice punchiness that we always love to hear in a snare drum. So we've cleaned things up. We've started to address some of those issues with 2 EQs there, and now we're using a compressor to kind of control some of those dynamics. It's sort of the first step in controlling some of those dynamics. So let's listen to our sound with everything off, and then I'll bring the EQs back in and this 1176 so we can hear the difference we're making. it's just popping through that little bit more. It's got a bit more aggression to it, and it just sounds that little bit cleaner. The next thing we need to look at, though, is the snare bottom. We haven't done anything to the snare bottom apart. Alright, before you go, guys, I do have a little gift for you. It's an ebook that I wrote myself. It's 25 pages long, and essentially it's a whole equipment recommendations list. All of that equipment you're going to need to get started recording and mixing, and the most important thing is it's on an affordable budget, because who likes spending money anyway? So it's absolutely free from me to you. It's got all of my recommendations. It's got the equipment that I started recording and mixing on. It's even got a chart at the back of the book that you can use to keep track of your spending and all of that stuff. So there's a link below this video. Click on that, and you basically tell me where you want me to send it, and I'll send it straight over to you just for you to enjoy. For now, guys, my name's Tim from Audio Tutor. Ciao.